Oklahoma, of course, with a different matter at hand against UTEP. 45-13 the final score for you folks that like to lay a dollar or two on the games. They even pulled through for you, I believe. So your general assessment of what we saw against the Miners.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's about what I expected, for the most part, on both sides of the ball. There was a little bit of there was some timing issues, I think, as you would certainly expect, kind of breaking in a new offense, a new quarterback, a new, just all the newness that they had on the offensive side of the ball. There was a little bit of there was some timing issues from time to time between Dylan Gabriel and the receivers. But I think other than that, I think it was a solid performance on the offensive side of the ball. You saw Eric Gray had over 100 yards. You saw he was a little bit better between the tackles, at least early on, than he was last year. Marcus Major came in, and I think he had 7 carries for 54 yards and a couple of scores in the goal line situation. And then Javonte Barnes came in a little bit late and provided a little bit of excitement. He's a kid that you can tell is probably going to get more and more playing time as the season goes on. He's has a little bit of a different speed. I mean, he fumbled his very first carry, which is never a good situation. Obviously, when you're trying to fight for playing time and things like that, but looked pretty good in the last little bit that he got there in the fourth quarter. And I think defensively, I think overall from the fans' perspective, it looked a little bit uneven, meaning I think the team tackled really, really well, but I think there was some concerns from a secondary perspective in terms of how many yards UTEP was able to get through the air. But I think listening to and understanding what Venables and the defensive staff wanted to accomplish in week one, I wouldn't read too much into some of that coverage. They were very, very vanilla, in what they did defensively. I mean, it was mostly base coverage. They blitzed a little bit. They would blitz the linebackers from time to time, but it was nothing exotic in terms of what you typically see from a Brent Venables defense. So I think they were vanilla, and I think the challenge that they had for this defense was really, can they tackle in open space? Can they tackle in a much greater efficiency than they did last year? And it was really, really solid. They played 3 deep across the defensive side of the ball for the majority of the game. So I think to a certain degree, this was a little bit of an audition, just to see how well this defense could play. And they deployed a little bit of a bend but don't break defense. They only gave up the 1 touchdown and a couple of long field goals. So I think overall it was, like I said, about what I expected, pretty solid. Obviously, you'll see more of the playbook open up as the season goes on. Probably not this week against Kent State, but certainly when they travel to Lincoln in a week or so, week and a half, I guess it would be.
Folks, of course, we'll get to your comments and questions. I see a few there in the chat. Want to get to a few other things first, because we see some big picture type questions there in the chat. But, the one thing that I brought up last week that I wanted to get your take on, and then certainly see how it played out, was not just the distribution of carries for the running backs, but the use of the running backs. And so, of course, Eric Gray, as you mentioned, led the way with 100+ yards. And he's certainly, from a talent standpoint and also an experience standpoint, the guy at this point. But just in regards to Javonte Barnes getting into the mix, he had 4 or 5 carries. And, of course, Marcus Major. Jason, what were your thoughts concerning the use of the running backs?
Yeah, I think they ran, to your point, Mark, they got Eric Gray out of the backfield from time to time. He caught a fairly long pass over the middle. So they got him in open space a little bit. Did throw the ball to him a bunch. Again, I think they saved a lot on the offensive side of the ball, as well on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, as you mentioned, Eric Gray actually ran between the tackles a little bit more, but that's their bread and butter. Inside run game, is their bread and butter, and what they run 90-95% of the time from a run game perspective. So you saw a little bit of the bulk that he was able to put on and kind of run between the tackles, carrying defenders from time to time for a few yards. I think I expected Marcus Major maybe to get a few more carries than he did. From a distribution perspective, as you mentioned, I'm pulling it up here. As we speak, and Eric Gray had 16 carries, Marcus Major had 7, and then you've got Javonte Barnes with 4. So I think part of it was a product of not necessarily time of possession, but as many possessions as Oklahoma had. They didn't run as many plays as Lebby would typically like. You've only got looks like they only had around 61 plays that they ran in the game. Lebby ultimately likes to be in the 90s, but likes to really be in the 70s or 80s. So, there was some drives that they weren't able to sustain, kind of mid second quarter, early third quarter. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that continues to unfold. To your point, Mark, as the season goes on, there was a couple of times during the game where they got a little bit pass happy, and didn't run the ball as much. And then once they started running the ball a little bit more, they became a little bit more consistent. And typically, I mean, they ran 38 times, passed through the ball 23 times. So that's about the mix that you would expect from a Jeff Lebby led offense. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that kind of continues to move forward as the season goes on. And I think Lebby probably had a pretty good feel of where he was at from a running game perspective with what he had with Eric Gray and Marcus Major and even Barnes to a certain degree. But I think they probably threw the ball maybe a little bit more early on just to see how that passing game looked and what the timing, because those are some things that I'd heard through camp, Mark, that the time they didn't feel concerned about it, that the timing would get there, but they said it's not where it needed to be. So I think that was very much purposely wanting to to look and see what that looked like.